AI agents are everywhere, automating tasks and making decisions at machine speed. But agents make mistakes. Just one rogue agent can do big damage before you even notice. Rubrik Agent Cloud is the only platform that helps you monitor agents, set guardrails, and rewind mistakes, so you can unleash agents, not risk. Accelerate your AI transformation at Rubrik.com. That's RUBRIK.com.
Saks Off 5th is your secret to fashion's most wanted deals at up to 70% off. On the hunt for designer steals that'll turn heads and leave a trail of envy? Uncover Gucci, Valentino, Versace, Stuart Weitzman, and more, with new arrivals dropping weekly at prices too good to stay confidential. Luxe layers, statement boots, and tailored essentials from Saks Off 5th will put your wardrobe on the most wanted list. Head to SaksOff5th.com or a Saks Off 5th store near you for a style lineup you won't want to miss.
You're listening to
DNA ID,
brought to you by AbJack Entertainment. Be sure to check out some of the other great true crime podcasts from this network, including The Murder in My Family, Missing Persons, Scene of the Crime,
Zodiac Speaking,
Beyond Bizarre True Crime, Campus Killings,
and
Killer Communications.
All of these podcasts are available for you to binge on right now, wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe where you're listening to this podcast so you don't miss an episode.
It was 2001. 39-year-old Brett Reedy called 911 and was put through to the Montgomery County, Maryland Police Department at 11:47 a.m. on Wednesday, May 2nd. He reported what was termed by dispatch a suspicious situation. But let's back up. The 911 caller, Brett, was a supervisor at Specialties Inc. on Wisconsin Avenue in Chevy Chase, Maryland. His employee, 49-year-old Leslie Preer, had not come into work at 10 a.m. Leslie was responsible and prompt and always arrived on time, so when she failed to show up or call in, Brett was concerned. Calls to Leslie's home by his office assistant went unanswered. So at about 11:15, with Leslie being over an hour late, Brett called her next of kin, her husband, 50-year-old Carl Eugene Preer, at his workplace. Carl knew of no reason why Leslie would not have gone to work, and he immediately became concerned when he, too, tried Leslie at their home, and she didn't answer. Carl told Brett he would drive home and check on her as his workplace was within a few miles of his home. Brett offered to go with him, and Carl said, "There's no need." Brett decided to go over there anyway. He had driven Leslie home a bunch of times, had a bunch of friends from the neighborhood, and had lived there himself, so this wasn't as strange an idea as it might sound. Brett actually beat Carl to the house on Drummond Avenue in Chevy Chase. He parked his Jeep on the street. Brett rang the doorbell and tried the front door, but it was locked. He started looking in the downstairs windows. At this point, which was 11:40 a.m., Carl drove up, and when Brett told him there was no answer and the door was locked, Carl used his house key to enter. It was immediately apparent that something was very wrong. Dried blood was smeared and spattered on the walls of the foyer. Dried blood was on the foyer floor, in the corner by the door. More blood was on the walls of the hallway, dining room, and living room. A small wooden 3-tiered corner shelving unit that normally sat in the living room corner adjacent to the foyer had been knocked over and apparently skidded across the foyer and ended up in the dining room. A foyer throw rug was scrunched up and stained with blood. Brett exclaimed, "Oh my God." Brett and Carl split up and quickly perused the first floor, Carl calling, "Leslie, Leslie." The house was silent. Carl went upstairs and quickly checked the bedrooms. Nothing. He came back down, and as he did, Carl and Leslie's black lab Boomer came up the stairs from the house's basement. Boomer typically hung out in the basement because it was nice and cool. The door was left open for her. She came up when she heard the men upstairs. Carl went down to the basement, but Leslie wasn't there. He came back upstairs and the two men discussed the blood on the walls, including on the staircase and in the kitchen, where Carl had noted a bloodstain on the inside of the kitchen door that led to the backyard. At 11:43 a.m., Brett called the Montgomery County Police from his cell phone and reported that Leslie Preer was missing and there was blood all over the downstairs of the house. He told the dispatcher that he was looking for an absent employee. He said, "We just walked in the door, her husband and I, and there's blood in the foyer. It looks like something possibly happened." The dispatcher asked, when was the last time anyone saw Leslie? Carl can be heard in the background telling Brett that he last saw Leslie when he left for work at 7:45 that morning. Brett told the dispatcher, "Leslie was supposed to come to work. She always walks to the bus stop on Wisconsin Avenue." The dispatcher told the two men to wait outside for responding officers. They complied and Brett hung up. The 911 call lasted about 3 minutes. Carl walked around to a couple of neighbors, asking a painter who was a couple of houses down if he'd seen anything. He hadn't, even though he'd been working outside for several hours. No one else was home when Carl knocked. He returned to his own house, went inside, got out the phone book, and using the cordless kitchen phone, started calling nearby suburban and Sibley hospitals. It had occurred to Carl that perhaps Leslie had an accident, maybe fell down the stairs, all the blood in the foyer and the other ground-level rooms, and a neighbor had taken her to the hospital. But Leslie was not listed as a patient, so he went back outside. Officers Barnett and Rochman arrived within minutes. They told Carl and Brett to stay outside, drew their weapons, and entered the house. They found Leslie in the one place Carl had not checked. She lay in the master bedroom shower stall, face down on the wet bloodstained tile. The taps were partially on, hot water still running. Her legs were partially extended out of the shower. She was wearing just her bra and underwear. The officers went outside where Carl stood. Officer Barnett stripped off his rubber gloves. "Mr. Preer, sir," Officer Barnett said, "your wife's dead." He radioed dispatch that, quote, "We're not fully sure what we have yet." But soon they were very sure. Leslie wasn't just dead. This was no accidental fall in the shower. She had been murdered. The officers blockaded the house to prevent anyone from entering, and the homicide and sex crime squad was summoned. Deputy Medical Examiner Dr. Patricia Tomsko responded to the scene and checked out Leslie in the shower. Then Thibodeau Transport removed the body to the medical examiner's office in Baltimore for autopsy. Leslie was still wearing her wet bra and underwear. She was not found to be wearing her contact lenses. The autopsy revealed that Leslie died from blunt force trauma to the head. She had 7 V-shaped lacerations on the anterior and posterior areas of the skull from being beaten with or against something hard. Her head had bled profusely, accounting for the blood in the foyer of the house. The autopsy also revealed hemorrhagic bruising on the internal tissues of her throat. She had also been manually choked. Bruising on her arms and torso indicated that she had fought with her attacker, and blood and tissue under her nails, which lingered there despite Leslie being under running water in the shower, was collected in hopes it belonged to her killer. She had burns on her skin from prolonged exposure to the scalding shower water. A sexual assault kit, when analyzed, contained no evidence of seminal fluid or sperm. Leslie had not been raped. But a white hair that appeared to be pubic in origin that was not consistent with Leslie's own or her husband's was collected from her pubic hair combings. She had food in her stomach that appeared to be pasta eaten recently. Let's talk about Leslie. Leslie Jennings was born on October 5, 1952, in Quonset Point, Rhode Island, to parents William and Miriam Jennings. Her father was in the military and moved the large family, consisting of the parents and 8 children, around quite a bit. Aside from Leslie, there were sisters Robin, Valerie, and Blair, and brothers Harlan, Frank, Bill, and Scott. Leslie's parents moved the family to Pensacola in 1963, and she graduated from Pensacola High School in 1969 and went on to matriculate at the University of Florida. She graduated from there in 1973 and married her husband Carl Preer in 1974. When she died, she was 49 years old. Leslie remained very close with her extended family, including, in particular, her cousin Shelley. She was also very close with her 24-year-old daughter Lauren, who told police she and her mom spoke on the phone as many as 10 times a day. Lauren sometimes came over and ate dinner with her parents, but she had attended Marymount University and had a job and no longer lived at home. Leslie had worked at D.C. firm Trammell & Crow, where she met one of her best friends, Gail. Gail left the firm to go to Specialties, Inc., and Leslie became a court stenographer, but the work wasn't steady, and she and Carl had a large rent payment monthly, so Gail helped her land the office manager job at Specialties. an advertising production company on Wisconsin Avenue in D.C. about 4 years before her death. She supplemented her income by working at a local bookstore some evenings. Leslie took the public bus to and from work. She hated driving, and she and Carl had only one car. She walked to and from the public bus stop on Wisconsin Avenue. Gail told police that Leslie was an educated, sophisticated person and that she and her husband were very different. Carl had recently started a new demanding job and often worked quite late. People close to Leslie said that she was quite lonely. According to Lauren, Leslie and Carl were not very social. They tended to stay in and were not country club goers or members of social groups or organizations. But Leslie was very well known in the neighborhood, as she often walked Boomer and chatted with the neighbors as the two strolled the suburban streets. 2 days after her murder on May 4th, Leslie had been supposed to go on a trip to Pittsburgh with her cousin Shelley, with whom she was very close. Of course, that trip did not happen. Lauren did not get a chance to say goodbye to her mom. On the morning of the murder, she called Leslie at work, as she usually did. She was told that Leslie had not come in and that she should probably call her dad. But she couldn't get a hold of him. After giving his preliminary statement at the scene, Carl was driven to Silver Spring by Officer Barnett. He wanted to tell Lauren in person about her mother's unthinkable death. He told her, "Your mom's been in an accident." Then Officer Barnett drove the two of them back to the house, where Carl was allowed inside to collect some clothing. Then he and Lauren left, and the house was sealed and placed under surveillance overnight. I know we're still planning for Halloween, but that means the holidays are right around the corner. It's not too early to check off gifts for everyone on your list and have fun while you're doing it. Even if you hate shopping, I think you'll love the selection of unique goodies at Uncommon Goods. Uncommon Goods makes holiday shopping stress-free and joyful, with thousands of one-of-a-kind gifts you can't find anywhere else. For example, I've already ordered an awesome unique gift for my brother, a hockey fan and a beer fan. I got him an actual game-used Washington Capitals hockey puck, cleaned up and converted to a bottle opener. How cool is that? And what a conversation piece it'll be when he opens a cold one for a friend. This is just an example of how Uncommon Goods has something for everyone. From moms and dads to kids and teens, from book lovers, history buffs, and die-hard football fans to foodies, mixologists, and avid gardeners. You'll find thousands of new gift ideas that you won't find anywhere else. Uncommon Goods looks for products that are high quality, unique, and often handmade or made in the U.S. Many are crafted by independent artists and small businesses. And because they're made in small batches, the best finds can sell out fast. With every purchase you make at Uncommon Goods, they give back $1 to a nonprofit partner of your choice. They've donated more than $3 million to date. So shop early, have fun, and cross some names off your list today. To get 15% off your next gift, go to uncommongoods.com/DNAID. That's uncommongoods.com/DNAID for 15% off. Don't miss out on this limited time offer. Uncommon Goods. We are all out of the ordinary.
AI agents are everywhere, automating tasks and making decisions at machine speed. But agents make mistakes. Just one rogue agent can do big damage before you even notice. Rubrik Agent Cloud is the only platform that helps you monitor agents, set guardrails, and rewind mistakes, so you can unleash agents, not risk. Accelerate your AI transformation at Rubrik.com. That's RUBRIK.com.
Let me describe the setting where this murder took place. Drummond Avenue in Chevy Chase, Maryland is a beautiful, verdant residential street, neatly lined with the classic shuttered brick colonials characteristic of the high-end D.C. suburb. Well-established trees, manicured lawns, and neatly paved driveways characterize the very affluent Chevy Chase neighborhood, and Drummond Avenue is a prime example of that. The Preers brick home had black shutters, a small front lawn with pruned bushes and shrubs, and a screened-in porch in the rear where Leslie often sat and smoked or read. On that fateful day in May, Detective Gary Turner responded to the scene. Also present were Detective Sergeant Thompson, Detective Jay Mudano, and Detective James Drury of the Homicide and Sex Crimes Unit. Carl Preer signed a consent to search form, and the investigators pulled on black cloth booties over their shoes and stepped through the front door. They saw all the disturbing sights that Carl and Brett had observed: dried blood on the walls that had been partially wiped, light spatter about 4 feet from the floor on the foyer wall near the stairs, the knocked-over 3-tiered corner table, which had blood on a corner and a droplet on a shelf, and a satchel on the floor that had been sitting on the table. Dried blood on the foyer floor and tennis shoe prints with a circular tread pattern in it. They also saw the blood-stained rug in the living room corner where the furniture stand had been. The foyer floor near the door was puddled with a small amount of standing water from an apparent cleanup attempt. A piece of paper that looked like a label from a can was stuck in dried blood on the foyer floor. A doormat in the foyer was crumpled in the middle of the floor and had blood on it, and blood had dripped up the stairway. In the master bedroom upstairs, the lights were off, but the ceiling fan was on. Detective Turner noted the bed was neatly made, but there was a white camisole and a pair of shorts on the corner of the bed. Some clothes were tossed over an armchair, but they were casual clothes, not work clothes. The closet light was on and the door open. A pair of sneakers in the closet appeared to match the sole print in the foyer, but there was no blood visible to Detective Turner's naked eye. The top dresser drawer was open and a black purse sat on the floor near the dresser. The reports I received state that no wallet was found within the purse, but the photos I saw of the purse include something that resembles a billfold. There was no blood detected in the bedroom at all. In the master bathroom where Leslie had been found, the shower stall was on the left, behind the open bathroom door, and the sink and toilet to the right. A tampon and some TP were in the toilet bowl, the seat of which was down. In the shower, both the hot and cold taps had been left on about a quarter turn, so water poured gently from the shower head. A very wet maroon towel was on the floor in front of the shower. Nothing else upstairs appeared to have been disturbed. A single bed in the back bedroom appeared to have been slept in, and the detectives learned that sometimes Leslie slept there because Carl snored. In the kitchen, the investigators found a pan consistent with the pasta that was in Leslie's stomach. They learned from Lauren that it was typical of her mom to eat leftover dinner for breakfast. And in one of the upstairs bedrooms, the iron was on. The house did not appear to have been broken into. There was no sign of forced entry, but the back door was unlocked. There were no paw prints from Boomer in any of the blood, so it appeared she had stayed in the basement. Forensic Services techs G. Arter and R. Dickey arrived to process the house. Over the next few days, the house was thoroughly analyzed by the crime scene team. They vacuumed the house for fiber and hair evidence. They meticulously photographed, measured, and diagrammed the scene. They collected samples of suspected blood throughout the various points in the house, making sure to collect blood droplets that could possibly have come from someone other than the victim bleeding at the scene. There were several of these. All pertinent areas were dusted for latent fingerprints. While some were collected, they were deemed insufficient for identification purposes. The CSIs collected the overturned corner table and tried to lift the undetermined piece of paper that was saturated in and then dried into the blood on the foyer floor. It turned out to be a flyer for Domino's Pizza. When they tried to pull it up, it was so stuck that it tore. They sifted through the garbage cans in the house and in the garage. No bloody cleanup materials, rags, or toweling were located. That same day, officers were dispatched to check the dumpsters at the surrounding shopping centers, looking for any bloody clothing or cleanup materials the killer could have discarded as he fled the scene, but they found nothing. In a crucial step in the process, the crime scene techs splayed blue lithocrystal compound on the walls and floors, which, like luminol, works to highlight any blood evidence not visible to the naked eye. From the report, quote, "This process revealed a large area in the foyer where blood had been cleaned up and showed wipe marks on the door and along the floor leading to the stairs. In addition, the blue lithocrystal process revealed areas around the kitchen and downstairs bathroom sinks where blood was present and had been cleaned up. There were several blood drops and smears all around the kitchen, along the door frames, trash can, and back door," end quote. The largest concentration of blood was in the foyer and in the shower stall where Leslie was found. So the investigators could tell from the physical evidence and the patterns of the bloodstains and footprints that Leslie had been attacked in the foyer. Remember the V-shaped lacerations on her skull. Around the perimeter of the foyer at the base of the walls was sharp-cornered baseboard molding. The shape of the corners exactly matched Leslie's head injuries. From a police report, quote, "We believe that Leslie's head was repeatedly struck against the hard corner of the floor molding, causing a large loss of blood." It was apparent that the perpetrator or perpetrators had physically carried the body from the foyer area upstairs to the shower stall and ran water over the body to wash away the blood and prevent the body from bleeding further on the floor of the residence, end quote. Detective Turner felt strongly that Leslie's body had been placed under running water specifically to destroy evidence. As I said, it was also evident that the killer had attempted to clean up the blood on the walls and floor of the foyer. The blood there was watery and patterned with wiping motions. That explained the water on the floor. But the task was apparently too overwhelming and the killer abandoned it, leaving entire patches of blood on the walls, door, and wood trim intact. The blue litho was also used on the floor, and while it enhanced the sneaker prints observed by the detectives, they weren't clear enough for reliable comparison purposes to a specific pair of shoes. Besides the fibers, hairs, blood samples, and prints, the CSIs collected a lot of items into evidence: the drain trap in the bathroom shower, a drinking glass in the kitchen, the bloody throw rug in the foyer, the baseboards suspected to be the murder weapon, the door frame bearing a possible handprint, an Herbal Essences shampoo bottle and Finesse conditioner bottle from the shower, the red towel from the bathroom, and a Mr. Paint flyer found on the Preers' stoop that morning. While all that was going on, Montgomery County police officers conducted a neighborhood canvass, knocking on the doors of neighbors up and down Drummond Avenue to see if anyone had seen or heard anything. Investigators also spoke with Leslie and Carl's postal delivery worker and utility workers who'd been in the neighborhood. The police report says, quote, no initial significant information was uncovered, end quote. But there was something observed that, if correct, impacted the timeline. Edward and Diane Lazar, I'm using a pseudonym there, lived right next door to the Preers. They didn't hang out socially, and Edward and Diane said Carl and Leslie were a quiet couple who didn't have any parties and didn't cause any problems. On the day of the murder, Edward said he had left the house early in the morning to go to work, and he didn't see anything unusual. When he left, his wife Diane was at home, waiting for the exterminator to arrive. The police interviewed the Lazar family babysitter, 74-year-old Mary Lewis, who had arrived at the house on the morning of May 2nd at 7:40 a.m. Mary said she didn't see anything unusual, but she noticed that there were no cars in the Preers' driveway, meaning Carl had already left for work. Mary proceeded to entertain Edward and Diane's child outside their home, washing her pickup truck, which was parked right in front of the house. Quote, she had an unencumbered view of the Preer residence and noticed and heard nothing unusual, end quote. The police also interviewed the exterminator, William Freeman, who got there at 9:10 that morning and conducted his whatever exterminators do inside the house. He left around 10:15 and noted nothing at all about the house next door. The neighbor on the other side of the Preers, Meg B., was the director of college counseling at Georgetown Prep, a rival high school to the cathedral schools I attended. She was full of information the way only a close and observant neighbor can be. She was interviewed by the 2001 investigators at least twice. Meg told Detective Turner that Leslie was a super friendly, very nice woman who always stopped to chat, admired her flowers, and so on. Leslie was the one who walked the dog and took out the recycling and the trash and mowed the lawn. Carl was never outside. Speaking of the recycling, Meg noted that the Preers' recycling was always full of empty, clanking glass bottles. But the Preers generally kept to themselves and didn't really socialize or mingle with the neighbors the way most on the block did. They didn't seem to socialize at all, actually. They didn't go out in the evenings and never hosted, and only their daughter Lauren was a sometime visitor to the house. The couple shared only one car, and Leslie walked everywhere. She was very fit, Meg said. Her death was very, very shocking to the young mother, who immediately requested an alarm system to be installed by her landlord. But besides just local color about the victim, Meg provided some interesting information. She said that around 7:40 in the morning of May 2nd, she was in her driveway putting her child into her car seat when she saw Carl leaving his house, exiting the front door in a suit and tie. She saw him pause 2/3 of the way out of the doorway and say to someone inside something like, "I'm off to work." A quote from the police report, Meg believes she saw a person at the front door wearing a white robe. She didn't see anyone else, end quote. Meg was interviewed a second time, and this time she said she recalled Carl making eye contact with her, which was unusual. She had never left at the same time as Carl in the 2.5 years they'd been neighbors, and after the murder she felt it was odd that on that day of all days he made sure she saw him leaving the house and even looked at her when that had never happened before. Meg's driveway was just 15 feet from the Preers' driveway, and their stately brick homes were quite close. But Meg heard and saw nothing else unusual that morning before she left for work. A skeptical Detective Turner went to her driveway and noted that from Meg's vantage point, he couldn't tell if the Preers' front door was open or not. Marcia M., who lived across the street from the Preers and dog sat for Boomer on occasion, told detectives she knew the couple relatively well. In her opinion, they got along well and she had no suspicions of any abuse or marital problems. In fact, she often chatted with Leslie and said Leslie seemed totally enamored of her husband Carl, whom she described as thoughtful and kind. Okay, so the neighbors did not see or hear any signs of abuse in the Prier household, but at least one of them thought that Carl had acted hinky on the day of the murder. And she wasn't the only one. Investigators did too.
AI agents are everywhere, automating tasks and making decisions at machine speed. But agents make mistakes. Just one rogue agent can do big damage before you even notice. Rubrik Agent Cloud is the only platform that helps you monitor agents, set guardrails, and rewind mistakes, so you can unleash agents, not risk. Accelerate your AI transformation at Rubrik.com. That's RUBRIK.com.
As a football fan, you want the best way to watch your favorite team at home. And now you can experience game day in all its glory with a Samsung Super Big TV. It's super big and super clear, giving you a closer view than being on the sideline. And you can go big without the blur thanks to the supersized picture enhancer on our biggest TVs. So get ready for your game day with the ultimate fan-worthy TV at Samsung.com. Supersized picture enhancer utilizes AI-based formulas, available on 85-inch and larger TVs on models QN70F and above.
This is Jacob Goldstein from What's Your Problem? When you buy business software from lots of vendors, the costs add up and it gets complicated and confusing. Odoo solves this. It's a single company that sells a suite of enterprise apps that handles everything from accounting to inventory to sales. Odoo is all connected on a single platform in a simple and affordable way. You can save money without missing out on the features you need. Check out Odoo at odoo.com. That's odoo.com.
Carl was interviewed at the scene around 2 p.m. by Detective Jay Drury. Carl told the detective that he and Leslie got up that morning around 7 a.m., and as he was leaving to go to work around 7:40, Leslie walked him to the door. She was wearing just her bra and underwear, which she often walked around in. He went to work, and Leslie called him around 9, asking where the spare toilet paper he had bought the day before was located in the house. He said he didn't know, but he spoke to her soon thereafter, and he couldn't recall who called whom, and she said she had found it. Carl noted later that the toilet paper was where it always was, at the top of the basement stairs. Carl said that before she left for work, Leslie frequently walked the dog Boomer down the street to the Little Falls path. He didn't know if she had done so on this particular day. It was noted that someone could have seen Leslie on the pathway and followed her home, but the neighborhood did not typically have transients, and this was thought to be a less likely option. By the way, Carl and others reported that Boomer was unlikely to bark at an intruder. She was a, quote, sweet, fat chocolate lab who was very easygoing and chill. Carl told the detective the entire story of his being at work and getting the phone call from Brett that Leslie was missing, of him driving home, and him and Brett entering the house and seeing the blood. He said he searched the house for his wife, including in the master bedroom, which was completely undisturbed. But the detective noted that Carl had no explanation for why he didn't check the master bedroom bathroom. Carl said he had just overlooked it. Carl insisted he had no idea who could have harmed his wife. He said in one of his early interviews before the autopsy report came in, when asked if Leslie had problems with anyone, quote, "Nothing that raises a flag, no phone calls, no weird messages, no hostility, nothing. I have no idea why. If it was a crime of violence, I have absolutely no idea other than why anyone would do it aimed at Leslie. She just didn't have any enemies," end quote. Leslie, Carl said, was a very bad liar as well. If she was having an affair, which the detectives questioned, she would not be able to keep it from him. Carl took the investigators through the house to review whether anything was missing. Leslie's wallet containing credit cards appeared to be missing, and one piece of jewelry, a bracelet, was not located. Carl was instructed to immediately contact the credit card companies and see if any activity had occurred on Leslie's cards since May 1st, 2001. Carl was not certain that the wallet had been stolen. He and Lauren both said Leslie was absent-minded and was known to frequently misplace her wallet, often leaving it at stores like Rodman's and Talbert's Liquors. He and Lauren called around to the retailers where Leslie sometimes stopped after work, Tenley Mini Mart and Rodman's and Giant Foods, and asked around, but no one had found it. The police checked with all neighboring police jurisdictions, but none of Leslie's property was ever recovered. No activity ever occurred on the credit cards, and as I said, I'm not certain that the wallet was actually stolen in the first place. As for the missing bracelet, Lauren said it was missing prior to the murder, and Leslie believed the cleaning lady's relative had lifted it. Detective Drury conducted a non-custodial re-interview with Carl in his police cruiser near Lauren Preer's apartment in Silver Spring around 2:30 on the day after the murder, May 3rd. Carl gave him the same general story, but under questioning revealed more pertinent details. He himself worked at Burdishaw Associates, a defense subcontractor in Bethesda, Maryland. It was about a 15-minute drive from his home. He said Leslie typically took a metro bus to work at her workplace in D.C. She usually left the house around 9:10 or 9:15 in the morning. On the night of May 1st, he worked late, which was typical. He then made a trip to the dump with some work stuff and then drove around looking for an in-stock battery for his digital work camera. He went to 3 different stores, finally bought a battery at Circuit City in Montgomery Mall, and got home sometime between 9 and 9:30. He was tired and had a couple of beers and then went to bed immediately. He said Leslie did not come to bed at the same time. She came to bed later in the evening, but he didn't notice what time. Carl told the detective that Leslie consistently failed to lock the back kitchen door and sometimes the other doors as well. The cleaning lady, Matilda, backed this up. Leslie often let the dog out back and also sat in the back and smoked. And of course, detectives believed that the killer exited through the back door since he had left some blood on both sides of the door, so it made sense that he had come in that way as well. The question was, who would know that the back door was usually unlocked? Someone who was intimately familiar with the Preer household. Okay, let's talk about the timeline. The night before the murder, Leslie left work at the same time as her colleague and friend Diane, around 5:30. Leslie was seen walking home on Drummond Avenue at 6:30. Police located and interviewed regulars on her bus route, but no one had anything unusual to report. On the night of Tuesday the 1st, Leslie and Lauren spoke on the phone when Leslie called her at work at Nordstrom's. Lauren thought the time was around 8:15. Her mom said Carl was already home and asleep. He was in one of his moods, she said. This did not mesh with Carl's story that he drove to Shady Grove and Montgomery Mall and came home after 9 and went straight to bed. On Wednesday the 2nd, Carl said he left work around 7:40 or 7:45. He got to work 5 miles away at 8, and he talked to Leslie at 9 when she called him. Carl sent some emails from work at 9:30 and 11:16, placing him at the office at that time. The blood on the Domino's flyer was completely dry by the time the first responders arrived. The iron was on, but Leslie was in her underwear and bra, and no work clothes were laid out. You can see where this is going. In the days after the murder, police found Carl's behavior odd and took note. For one thing, Brett told them that when they initially found the blood in the house and Leslie missing, Carl didn't seem particularly upset or panicked. Second, the responding officers Barnett and Rochman noted that when they upholstered their service weapons to go into the house, Carl jokingly said, "Oh, you guys mean business." He did not appear to grasp or appreciate the gravity of the situation, or the fact that a joking tone was inappropriate. Third, they thought it was weird that he had basically done a crappy job of looking for Leslie in the house, as he hadn't even bothered to look in the shower stall in their bathroom. A supplemental police report says, quote, as the investigation began to point toward Carl Preer as the primary suspect, it was determined that a search warrant was necessary to continue the crime scene search. The reference search warrant was signed and then served at the residence on May 3rd at approximately 13:45 hours, end quote. Carl had given consent to search the house on the day of the murder, but this would be a more in-depth search, the kind where police toss everything, looking for evidence of a crime. Detectives Drury and Turner interviewed Carl a third time at his motel room at the Park Inn in Rockville, Maryland, on the morning of Friday, May 4th. They obtained more backstory about Carl and Leslie and the state of their relationship. According to Carl, he and Leslie had been having some problems because several years earlier, Leslie had started drinking heavily. Note that Carl completely downplayed his own drinking. His daughter Lauren told police that both her parents were functioning alcoholics, and they had a lot of arguments that involved yelling and screaming. Leslie's alcohol abuse in particular, though, was a source of tension between her, Carl, and Lauren, because Lauren said when her mom drank, she could get needy, naggy, and nasty. It seems that everyone who knew Leslie pretty much knew about her drinking, which happened only at night. It had not carried over into the daytime. But she would regularly consume 2 full bottles of wine in the evenings. Carl told the investigators that at night Leslie tended to drink too much wine and he didn't like to be around her, so he often worked late. Here is a quote from one of Carl's interviews. Leslie was an absolute love, beauty when she didn't drink. She would have a lot, and in all honesty, it's one of the reasons why I'd kind of come home late because it was getting hard to deal with. Carl said when Leslie drank, which was often, she would needle him and make mountains out of molehills. Quote, she would keep coming at you, bam, bam, bam. It wasn't fun, Carl said. He admitted that they had argued over the issue, and he had even whacked a glass of wine out of her hand on one occasion. He had also grabbed her and shaken her by the shoulders, telling her to snap out of it. One time he pushed her against the wall and she hit her head and burst into tears. After this incident, he questioned, "What am I doing?" But he said she had also hit him when she was drunk. They had each threatened divorce, but no one had acted on those threats. Carl said despite it all, Leslie was a wonderful person and they loved each other dearly. Was Carl telling the truth, or had things between him and Leslie finally gotten out of hand? Police wanted to know. Lauren attested to their frequent arguments, but said that her father was never violent with her mother, except for one instance a decade earlier when he'd been drinking and he pushed Leslie up against a wall and yelled at her. Carl admitted to that incident. But the investigators felt that where there was smoke, there's fire. From the police report, quote, "From May 10 to May 24, the investigation and evaluation of evidence from within the house, from search warrant and interviews was evaluated and further examined," end quote. Police conducted extensive background interviews with relatives, co-workers, friends, and acquaintances of Carl's and Leslie's. And they started to dig up some dirt. People who knew Leslie reported that she and Carl had major problems in their marriage. This is a quote from the police report. There were suspicions of substantial verbal abuse toward Leslie by her husband Carl, and also past suspicions by friends and co-workers of physical abuse, end quote. Leslie's co-worker and very close friend Gail told police that Leslie and Carl were very different, their marriage was strained, and she felt that Carl could be behind Leslie's murder. Leslie's cousin Shelley said Leslie and Carl argued a lot, and she also suspected him. She and others in the family felt it odd that Carl so quickly cleaned out the house and got rid of Leslie's possessions. He seemed to have no emotional attachment to reminders of his wife. Some former co-workers and friends of Leslie's at Trammell and Crow were interviewed, John D. and Spencer B., who had no significant information to provide, but described Leslie as a very dedicated employee who was a bit nervous and excitable. Christine B. was very good friends with Leslie and often had lunch with her. Christine said that she felt that Leslie was a bit intimidated by Carl and said he was very controlling about her spending habits and her social life. One time, they had had lunch with another friend, Charlotte, at the Preer home, and they observed that Carl was drunk and verbally abusive to Leslie, belittling her in front of her guests. Leslie was deeply embarrassed, and Christine and Charlotte left early. Christine did not like Carl and wondered why Leslie was still with him. The other woman at this lunch party, Charlotte, echoed all of this in her interview. She also felt that Carl was very controlling of Leslie, and she said that twice she'd seen bruises on Leslie's face, which Leslie had tried to cover up with makeup. Charlotte didn't know the origin of the bruises, but had her suspicions. Carl was starting to look like a very good suspect.
AI agents are everywhere, automating tasks and making decisions at machine speed. But agents make mistakes. Just one rogue agent can do big damage before you even notice. Rubrik Agent Cloud is the only platform that helps you monitor agents, set guardrails, and rewind mistakes, so you can unleash agents, not risk. Accelerate your AI transformation at Rubrik.com. That's RUBRIK.com.
As a football fan, you want the best way to watch your favorite team at home. And now you can experience game day in all its glory with a Samsung Super Big TV. It's super big and super clear, giving you a closer view than being on the sideline. And you can go big without the blur thanks to the supersized picture enhancer on our biggest TVs. So get ready for your game day with the ultimate fan-worthy TV at Samsung.com. Supersized picture enhancer utilizes AI-based formulas, available on 85-inch and larger TVs on models QN70F and above.
This is Jacob Goldstein from What's Your Problem? When you buy business software from lots of vendors, the costs add up and it gets complicated and confusing. Odoo solves this. It's a single company that sells a suite of enterprise apps that handles everything from accounting to inventory to sales. Odoo is all connected on a single platform in a simple and affordable way. You can save money without missing out on the features you need. Check out Odoo at odoo.com. That's odoo.com.
Part of the investigators' theories focusing on Carl revolved around Leslie's time of death. Unfortunately, the pathologist could not pinpoint that. Her being in the shower could have changed the conditions of her body and obscured post-mortem changes. The fact is, no one could say for certain that Leslie had been killed on the morning of May 2nd. They only had Carl's word for it that Leslie was even alive that morning. There was a neighbor who had also reported seeing what looked like a figure in a bathroom in a doorway while Carl was leaving the house, but as I said, Detective Turner was skeptical of the reliability of this sighting. Carl had been confirmed to have been at work from about 8 a.m. on that morning. He maintained that he spoke with Leslie on the phone that morning when she called to ask where the toilet paper was. So the investigators, seeking to verify this, obtained the Preer residence's telephone records documenting calls made to or from the house on May 2nd, from between 8 a.m. and 11:30 a.m. The Verizon records showed that the Preer home phone had no outgoing calls that morning. There was an incoming call to the house from Carl's office at 8:36 a.m., which connected for 2 minutes and 54 seconds, and a call at 11:27 a.m. where it rang for 4 seconds. That was it. So police could not verify what Carl told them, that Leslie had called him at work at 9 a.m., which would prove that he was not at home. In fact, quite the opposite. He had called the house, not the other way around. Also, the maid, Matilda, told the investigators that she had been at the Preer residence during the day on May 1st, leaving at 5 p.m. When she left the house, the single bed in the spare bedroom was made up neatly. Carl had said Leslie slept in their bed the night before the murder. Then why had they found the single bed unmade? Notice that absolutely none of this was a smoking gun. But there were inconsistencies in what Carl was telling the police. And of course, he admitted that he and his wife had problems and arguments that had turned physical. He gave them motive on a silver platter. Detectives Turner and Drury also noted with significant interest that Carl and Leslie were in significant financial trouble. They owed credit card debt of over $18,000. They rented and did not own the house where Leslie was killed, and they had no other assets. Leslie was stressed about unpaid bills and mounting financial pressures. She was also struggling at work, and according to the reports, interviews with her boss and coworkers indicated she was close to being let go. For her part, Leslie felt she was overqualified for the office manager job she held and was dissatisfied with her position there. Carl, meanwhile, had a newish, stressful job and felt under significant pressure for both financial and professional reasons. There was more. A statement from some of the neighbors gave police good reason to suspect that Leslie had been killed at night. The across-the-street neighbors, Jack, Jay, and his wife Sandra, were friendly with the Preers and had them over for dinner in the past. Jack told the investigators that on the night of May 1 into May 2, Tuesday night into Wednesday, he was up late working on his computer. He went upstairs to go to bed at 2 in the morning, and he looked out the window and noted that the Preer house had every single light on, but the drapes were all closed. This was very unusual. But the murder occurring sometime in the night would explain why so much of the blood in the foyer was fully dry by the time the investigators got there, and that would leave Carl with no alibi. Police felt that the pasta found in Leslie's stomach was more support for a nighttime murder. If she ate that for dinner and was in the process of digesting it, then she had been killed the night before. Remember that Lauren said Leslie very commonly ate leftover dinner for breakfast, but that could have just been a scared young woman covering for her dad. The reality is police thought that many of the things Carl did and said were inconsistent and others just plain weird. In fact, the investigators thought Carl was weird, period. And that is never good when you're the spouse of a victim of an unsolved murder. You can see where all this is going. The financial concerns, the professional strain, Leslie's increasing drinking, the arguing, and possibly Carl's abusive behavior, quote, set the tone for a very tense, if not volatile, relationship between Carl and Leslie, end quote. The early police reports label Carl as the prime suspect in his wife's murder. And even though sometimes Carl seemed a bit naive in his interactions with the investigators, he quickly caught on. When the police informed him that his wife Leslie's death was being investigated as a homicide, quote, Carl hung his head and after a short pause stated, I think I know where this is going. The detective spoke with him, advising him of their suspicions that he may be responsible for his wife's death. He denied any involvement, end quote. It's important to note that detectives had stopped this particular interview moments earlier because Carl was crying. They gave him time to compose himself. And he denied over and over that he had anything to do with his wife's demise, even saying, I swear to God on a stack of Bibles, she was alive when I left the house at 7:45. They didn't believe him. Carl agreed to voluntarily come down to the Homicide and Sex Crimes Unit for police to take photos and gather evidence. He allowed the detectives to photograph him in his underwear, and several small scratches were seen and photographed, including one on his hairline and one on his wrist where his watch was. It didn't help that Carl's Timex watch was being held together by duct tape because the band was broken. He handed that and his glasses over, as well as his work clothing worn on the day of the death discovery, to be searched for traces of blood. He also gave hair and blood samples. He agreed to provide fingernail scrapings, and those were collected. All of this evidence was packaged and transferred to the Montgomery County Police Crime Lab. Carl was basically bending over backward to cooperate with police. He even agreed to participate in a polygraph. The polygraph examiner concluded that he was not being truthful in his responses. However, Detective Allison Dupuy later told 2020 about polygraphs, quote, "They're an indicator that the person is having a response in their body, a physical response to whatever questions are being asked. And I can see how he would have failed because it's a very stressful situation and the police think that he killed his wife," end quote. After Carl's interviews in which detectives' concerns about his demeanor were not allayed, they obtained yet another search warrant on May 8th to seize the computer within his house and to impound and search Carl's black Honda Accord. No significant evidence was uncovered from the searches of the vehicle and computer. On the same day, May 8th, Carl again voluntarily came to the police department to provide elimination fingerprints and answer more questions. He was interviewed again. This was now at least the fourth time, and he added no new information and continued to deny any knowledge of or participation in his wife's death. The detectives pressed him, with Detective Drury saying, "Be a man, tell us what happened." When Carl maintained that he had, Drury said, "But you didn't tell us the truth. You got to do the right thing. We can prove that you haven't told us the truth. We have physical evidence that shows that Leslie was dead before 7 a.m. that morning. Evidence doesn't lie. People lie." Carl walked out. On May 24th, Carl was notified that he could come down to the Homicide and Sex Crimes Unit to collect his computer, which the technical department had finished reviewing. At this time, he notified the detectives that he had hired a lawyer, and on the lawyer's advice, he would not be answering any more questions. The detectives flat out told him that they believed he was responsible for the murder of his wife and laid out all the evidence, which was entirely circumstantial, that led them to that conclusion. They said things like, "When's it going to end? Allow Lauren to get closure. We all do things we regret. We all know what happened. You can help Lauren by doing the right thing. Lauren and Leslie deserve it." They even told him that the physical evidence showed that Leslie was dead before 7 a.m. and that she did not call him from the house. "She didn't call you at 9, they said. We all know that. Carl repeatedly refused to respond and reiterated that he had been advised not to answer questions. Not being under arrest, he left. Lauren, the Preer's daughter, who was in her early 20s at the time, told the investigators she did not feel that her father had killed her mom. She said he would never hurt Leslie. She stuck by her dad. In what Leslie's brother Bill described as an eerie and uncomfortable experience, Leslie's brothers John and Bill Jennings walked around the house with Carl when they came to town for Leslie's memorial service. Carl had never again returned to live in the house. The police tape was still up and the door was still sealed, but the scene had been cleared and they were permitted to enter. Bill wrote in an email to the family that inside the house, quote, "There were dark stains on the floor next to the door and on the floor in the living room near where the throw rug was. On the stairway, I saw one or perhaps two spots where blood may have been. After walking through the house, I can see why Carl made a fast trip upstairs and back. I'm not sure a struggle was obvious. Most of the blood was near the door, and I can see why Carl may have thought Leslie was not upstairs. At the top of the stairs, you can look quickly to the left and take the entire master bedroom and see into the bathroom. You cannot see the master bathroom shower stall from the bedroom doorway. We did look in the bathroom shower stall, and the shower floor was covered in blood." End quote. The trio could still see all the blue litho the police had sprayed throughout the house and on the garage, but Bill noted there was none whatsoever on the back fence. He was unsettled by this, feeling strongly that it was likely the suspect escaped by climbing over the fence. However, he voiced confidence in Detective Turner and told his siblings in his email that Turner came across as a genuinely sincere investigator who very much wanted to solve the case. On June 12th, blood samples collected by forensic services technicians throughout the Preer house were submitted for DNA comparison by Cellmark Diagnostics Labs in Germantown, Maryland. On June 18th, Detectives Turner and Drury picked up Carl at his workplace and showed him a search warrant to collect a blood sample and hair samples. They transported him to a hospital where blood was drawn by a phlebotomist, and then at the Homicide and Sex Crimes Unit, hair samples were collected from his person. He was then driven back to his workplace. The blood and hairs were packaged and submitted to Cellmark. Cellmark's report was ready on July 31st. The testing found that nearly all the blood evidence seized from the Preer residence was consistent with that of the victim, Leslie Preer. However, there were 3 small blood drip samples which were not consistent with Leslie and were from a male. These were items CS11, which was a blood drop taken from the baseboard under the dining room window, CS12, a blood drop taken from the kitchen door leading to the dining room on the dining room side, and CS13, a blood drop taken from the interior of the kitchen door leading to the backyard. Cellmark Diagnostics DNA testing showed that these male samples were not consistent with the DNA of Carl Preer. Their report could not have been more clear. Quote, the DNA obtained from the swab labeled baseboard under the dining room window, the swab labeled kitchen door dining room side, and the swab labeled kitchen door interior door to rear yard is from a male. Leslie Preer and Carl Preer are excluded as sources of the DNA obtained from these samples, end quote. Further, right and left-hand fingernail clippings taken from Leslie at her autopsy revealed DNA from both Leslie and the same unknown male contributor who had left those 3 blood drops at the murder scene. Again, it was specified that Carl Preer was not the source of this male DNA. The detective's investigative report reads, and you can just hear the sigh of frustration, quote, as a result of these findings, it is believed that there was an unknown male within the crime scene whose DNA was present within the aforementioned samples, end quote. This was the first time that detectives realized they might have to look elsewhere for Leslie's killer. As Leslie's brother Bill Jennings said to his siblings in an email, quote, 90% of the evidence points the detectives in the direction of one suspect, and 10% of the evidence points scientifically and very reliably to the possible presence of a third party. The 15-member detective force has brainstormed all types of scenarios. Detective Turner finds it hard to believe a stranger committed the crime and attempted to clean up, end quote. Indeed, why would an intruder bother to haul Leslie upstairs to the shower and try to clean up the foyer? Attempts to destroy evidence and obscure the crime scene point to an offender with a connection to his victim. But who the heck was he? Submission of the foreign male DNA profile to CODIS on September 19, 2001 resulted in no hits.
AI agents are everywhere, automating tasks and making decisions at machine speed. But agents make mistakes. Just one rogue agent can do big damage before you even notice. Rubrik Agent Cloud is the only platform that helps you monitor agents, set guardrails, and rewind mistakes, so you can unleash agents, not risk. Accelerate your AI transformation at Rubrik.com. That's RUBRIK.com.
As a football fan, you want the best way to watch your favorite team at home. And now you can experience game day in all its glory with a Samsung Super Big TV. It's super big and super clear, giving you a closer view than being on the sideline. And you can go big without the blur thanks to the supersized picture enhancer on our biggest TVs. So get ready for your game day with the ultimate fan-worthy TV at Samsung.com. Supersized picture enhancer utilizes AI-based formulas, available on 85-inch and larger TVs on models QN70F and above.
This is Jacob Goldstein from What's Your Problem? When you buy business software from lots of vendors, the costs add up and it gets complicated and confusing. Odoo solves this. It's a single company that sells a suite of enterprise apps that handles everything from accounting to inventory to sales. Odoo is all connected on a single platform in a simple and affordable way. You can save money without missing out on the features you need. Check out Odoo at odoo.com. That's odoo.com.
So the detectives set out to try to identify the source of the unknown male DNA found at the crime scene. They absolutely did not rule out the idea that Carl had perhaps hired someone to kill his wife. For that reason, they continued to pick apart Carl's life. But they also extended their inquiry, conducting interviews of people who knew Leslie to try to identify any men who had it out for her. Detective Turner extensively interviewed Leslie's friends, Gail and Debbie B., and her cousin Shelley, trying to find out the names of men Leslie knew. He also collected DNA from her brother Frank, who visited the Preer home often, and from her manager who found her, Brett R. The Montgomery County investigators completed a VICAP form and submitted it to the FBI on August 20th, 2001. They uncovered no similar cases throughout the Metro D.C. area, although I have no idea what time frame they used as parameters. I would think that the then unsolved 1994 Robin Lawrence case, in which Robin was slain in her Northern Virginia bedroom by an unknown attacker and not raped, would have come up, even with dissimilar causes of death and circumstances. I covered that case in the previous full-length DNA ID episode. The investigators also collected comparison DNA samples from several men for elimination purposes. One was a man named by Carl as a continuing thorn in Leslie's side, her manager, Brett R., who had somewhat oddly, in my opinion, driven to Leslie's house to check on her. Brett was apparently considered something of a hunk by the women in the office and thought a lot of himself, but Leslie did not like him and knew that he was about to fire her. She was on pins and needles around him because she was employed only on a month-to-month basis and felt that he was always scrutinizing her activities. On August 22nd, the detectives went to Leslie's place of employment, Specialties, Inc., and obtained saliva samples from all male employees from the company. These included Joel K., Leslie's ultimate boss, Brett R., her supervisor, and Kevin O., a coworker. They submitted the samples for comparison with the unknown DNA. None matched. This was surprising to the detectives because of a bit of a bombshell they had learned from conducting interviews with Lauren. She revealed that Leslie had had an emotional, if not physical, affair with an unnamed coworker when she worked at Trammell & Crow in D.C. This started way back in 1984 or 1985, but detectives were eager to figure out who Leslie's possible lover was and whether he was still involved in her life. That seemed unlikely 15 years later, but perhaps her willingness to engage in extramarital affairs showed a pattern, and there was another unknown man in her life. Detectives heartily embraced this theory because they had some evidence implying an affair. Remember, the unidentified white pubic hair found on Leslie's pubic hair combings. Additional unidentified hairs inconsistent with both Leslie and Carl were collected by the CSIs from the white pillowcases in the master bedroom. Who was in Leslie and Carl's bed? This possible affair theory gave detectives a lot of angles to pursue, and was the reason they persisted in tracking down as many current and former coworkers as they could find. Detective Turner contacted Leslie's former boss at Trammell & Crow, Mr. T. Roth. He was interviewed on October 8th. Roth was unaware of any office romances involving Leslie and doubted that she would be involved in one. He gave a saliva sample, which was submitted and tested, and Roth was ruled out. I already mentioned the interviews with John D. and Spencer B., and the other male colleagues from whom DNA samples were collected. The police file I read indicated that the investigators attempted to contact all of Leslie's associates for the last 10 years to try to unearth any lovers in her life that could possibly explain the source of the foreign male DNA. The investigation into Leslie's unidentified lover extended for months and never bore fruit. Detectives collected DNA samples from the exterminator who had been working at the neighbor's house on the day Leslie was killed, William Freeman. They also collected a sample from Lauren's boyfriend, who of course was known to Leslie. His name was Scott K. They also collected samples from several of the neighbors, a detective who had dated the neighbor Marcia named John B., and Edward Lazar, because he lived right next door and Lauren told Detective Turner that Lazar made a pass at her and always leered at her mom. And they obtained a list from Carl of workers, a plumber in particular, who might have been at the home over the past year, and obtained their DNA samples as well. They also tested a landscaper in the neighborhood who had quit after the murder. Lauren, Leslie's daughter, felt that a neighbor was most likely responsible for Leslie's murder. A neighbor would know her routine of walking to and from the bus stop, what time she left for work, and most importantly, when Carl had left for the day. Since there was no evidence of a break-in, it seemed Leslie might have opened the door to someone, as someone would likely do with a neighbor. Another theory that was pursued was perhaps that Leslie had walked the dog that day and someone had followed her back to the house. The other thought was perhaps she let the dog out in the backyard instead of walking her, and perhaps she left the door unlocked and the person came in the back door. That meant it could be anyone. On September 4th, the detectives again entered the Drummond Avenue house. The home was vacant, Carl had moved out, and the home was returned to the rental company. But the blood evidence was still intact, and more samples were collected by CSI J. Neubauer. One trend that was brought to the investigators' attention was a string of unsolved murders of white, middle-aged women in Montgomery County in the 18 months leading up to Leslie's slaying. This series of murders was notable because Chevy Chase and Montgomery County in general had a fairly low crime rate. This from a May 4, 2001 article in the Washington Post. Quote, Prier is the sixth Montgomery County woman to be classified as a homicide victim in the past 18 months, police said. Police Chief Charles A. Moose said yesterday that the 6 women's deaths are not related because they all lived in different areas of the county and died in different ways. There is no serial, there is no panic. We don't want there to be any inference, the chief said. But Leslie's murder, as we heard, the 6th in 18 months, was the tipping point that led police to appoint a special task force to look into the crimes and calm public fears of a serial slayer. The murders included the August 1999 beating and stabbing murder of 67-year-old Gloria Elizabeth Claggett, found in her home in Durwood. The rest of this list of victims is derived from the Washington Post. Allison Thresher, 45, of Bethesda, who disappeared and has not been found. Police consider the case a homicide. In 2020, police announced they believed Allison was killed and buried somewhere in the area of the Beltsville Agricultural Research Center. Jean M. Jenkins, 75, discovered bound and dead from a heart attack in the foyer of her Rockville home. Susan K. Street, 56, shot outside her front door in Aspen Hill after delivering Avon products to a neighbor. Police have a suspect but have not named him. Sue Wen Stottmeister, 48, assaulted as she jogged and left to die near a Rock Creek Park trail in Rockville. And Leslie Jennings Preer, 49, killed in her house in Chevy Chase. In July 2002, the police issued a public statement that there was no serial murderer on the loose. A law enforcement task force had determined the murders were unrelated. 2 of the murders by then had been solved. These were the Claggett and Stottmeister cases. Sue was killed by a 25-year-old neighbor, and Elizabeth was killed by a robber. The other 3 remain unresolved. In another angle, detectives identified a number of subjects who had committed burglaries or home invasion robberies in the Bethesda Chevy Chase area. These included men like John York and Darrell Waynes, both area burglars known to police. All of these subjects were investigated, and attempts were made to eliminate them via saliva samples for DNA. Some of these subjects submitted to saliva samples, and those that did were eliminated. Some refused to cooperate absent a warrant. There are at least 7 names in the case file I was provided of burglars and robbers who were known to police for whom no DNA sample was available.
AI agents are everywhere, automating tasks and making decisions at machine speed. But agents make mistakes. Just one rogue agent can do big damage before you even notice. Rubrik Agent Cloud is the only platform that helps you monitor agents, set guardrails, and rewind mistakes, so you can unleash agents, not risk. Accelerate your AI transformation at Rubrik.com. That's RUBRIK.com.
As a football fan, you want the best way to watch your favorite team at home. And now you can experience game day in all its glory with a Samsung Super Big TV. It's super big and super clear, giving you a closer view than being on the sideline. And you can go big without the blur thanks to the supersized picture enhancer on our biggest TVs. So get ready for your game day with the ultimate fan-worthy TV at Samsung.com. Supersized picture enhancer utilizes AI-based formulas, available on 85-inch and larger TVs on models QN70F and above.
This is Jacob Goldstein from What's Your Problem? When you buy business software from lots of vendors, the costs add up and it gets complicated and confusing. Odoo solves this. It's a single company that sells a suite of enterprise apps that handles everything from accounting to inventory to sales. Odoo is all connected on a single platform in a simple and affordable way. You can save money without missing out on the features you need. Check out Odoo at odoo.com. That's odoo.com.
By January 2020, the Preer case was on life support. Carl had called for updates regularly in the first few months, but had tapered off. Detective Turner still suspected him, but police and the state's attorney were reluctant to bring a case against him, given the unexplained foreign DNA found at the scene. Leslie's family was torn. Some of Leslie's siblings felt that Carl was unlikely to have killed Leslie given their 27-year marriage and his general laid-back attitude, and they never ever had known him to be violent. Let me just say here that the bruises on Leslie that were seen by her coworker were possibly not inflicted by Carl at all, but were a result of her falling after drinking 2 bottles of wine at night. She was known to drink until she passed out. On the other hand, some members of the Jennings family remained suspicious of Carl. They found his statement about an unverified 9 a.m. phone call about toilet paper to be very odd and possibly manufactured. They thought it unbelievable that he so quickly rushed home to check on Leslie after she was late to work and then failed to find her in her own bathroom. And they thought it odd that Carl downplayed the situation as Leslie possibly falling down the stairs in an accident. He had called Leslie's cousin Shelley on the night of May 2nd and said that Leslie had had a fatal accident. They knew about the couple's financial strains and Leslie's drinking and recognized that everyone has their breaking point. Carl may have reached his. Detectives went to great lengths to solve this case. For example, they consulted a renowned blood spatter expert to try to pinpoint the timing and sequence of events. This was Bill Vosberg, who reported on May 4th, 2002, that living victim movement was confined to the foyer. The front door was closed, and the attack began and ended there. Leslie was carried up to the shower after she was already dead. The suspect would have had substantial blood on his clothing, including shoes, belts, watch, and glasses, Vosberg concluded. On April 9, 2002, Detective Turner met with personnel from the FBI's National Center for Analysis of Violent Crimes at Quantico, Virginia, to discuss the case. He had previously sent over photographs, reports, crime scene information, and case evidence. At the meeting, he presented a summation of the case to the group. It was the members' joint opinion that although Carl was certainly a suspect, quote, the presence of mystery DNA at the crime scene stifled any charges against Prier for the murder of his wife, end quote. Turner later told the family that the meeting with the FBI was disappointing and not really productive. The FBI was unable to provide any insight into what detectives may have missed or other things they should be doing. Turner was eager to tackle the science behind the dried blood at the scene and see if it could help him prove that Leslie had been killed sometime during the night before she was found. His report states, quote, during the next several months, the investigation continued with no significant progress in determining the unknown DNA contributor. Efforts were underway to locate a forensic scientist who would be willing to conduct a blood drying experiment to determine the approximate time it would have taken for the piece of paper torn from the dried blood on the foyer floor to have dried onto the floor. Several scientists were contacted, but due to multiple difficulties in trying to recreate the exact environment, temperature, etc., all the experts declined the request, end quote. Desperate to collar Carl, the detectives had even considered whether the blood containing the foreign DNA could have been planted in the Prier house. After they contacted area blood sources like hospitals and doctors' offices and discussed the transport and handling of fresh blood, they concluded this was very unlikely. Not only would it be difficult for a suspect to obtain fresh blood to plant, it would have been impossible for the suspect to plant matching DNA-laden blood and tissue under Leslie's nails. Nevertheless, on the first anniversary of Leslie's murder, Detective Turner sat down with Lauren and told her he still felt her father had something to do with Leslie's death. He basically cited his instincts and experience as a cop for so many years. He told Lauren, quote, it is so bizarre to think that this could be someone else, end quote. He told her his theory that something happened on the night before. When Carl got home, they argued and Carl lost it. His report from around this time states, quote, it is the writer's belief that Carl Eugene Prier remains a viable suspect in this case and holds information as to the identity of the unknown DNA contributor or was a willing or conspiring party in the murder of his wife, Leslie Prier. It is difficult, if not impossible, to accept that Leslie Prier's intruder/killer made attempts to clean up the crime scene, making trips to the kitchen sink, and then left the scene carrying the blood-soaked cleaning material with him. It is also difficult to believe that an unknown intruder would enter the residence, confront Leslie Prier still in her bra and panties, kill her brutally by slamming her head on the foyer floor and against the moldings, and then strangling her. He would have then had to carry the body upstairs to the master bedroom shower stall, turn on the water to wash away evidence or blood, and then begin to attempt to clean up the crime scene of blood deposits. He would then have had to have left the residence unseen by anyone in the immediate area. This writer also has difficulty accepting that an intruder would commit a murder and then remain on the scene to clean it up to the degree of this case, having no knowledge whether some other member of the family or friend might come in while he was there. There were 2 witnesses near the Prier residence during the time of 9 a.m. to 10 a.m., and neither heard any screams or noises from the Prier residence, end quote. Turner specified that he believed Carl was lying about the 9 a.m. phone call from Leslie. Carl had admitted that the toilet paper was always kept on the side of the basement steps, yet said Leslie called him to ask where it was. That just made no sense. Neither did Carl failing to look in the shower for his wife when all that blood was in the house. Quote, in conclusion, the writer believes that C. Prier has not been truthful in this investigation. A possible theory to explain the foreign DNA is Leslie Prier was visited by a male friend in the early evening of May 1st, 2001, prior to Carl Prier's arrival at approximately 2100 hours. C. Prier arrived home prior to the male friend's departure and a confrontation occurred. The male friend was injured by C. Prier and bled before leaving the residence via the back door. C. Prier then turned his anger on Leslie Prier and killed her in the foyer area. C. Prier spent the early morning hours trying to clean up the crime scene before going to work at 7:40 a.m. on May 2nd, 2001. He was unable to complete the task and went to work. When Brett R. called, C. Preer did not expect Brett R. to respond to the residence. It could be theorized that C. Preer planned to return home the evening of May 2, 2001, complete the cleanup, and dispose of L. Preer's body under cover of darkness. C. Preer could have disposed of all the cleanup material within a dumpster while en route to work on May 2, 2001. End quote. I mean, as theories go, it's a pretty good one. It explains pretty much everything, except why police had been unable to locate this phantom male visitor of Leslie's, whom no one had ever seen or heard of. Lauren did not buy it. She said her father wasn't the possessive, jealous type. She could not imagine him staring his wife in the face as he killed her. And she had asked her father outright if he did it, and he denied it. By January of 2003, Detectives Turner and Drury had DNA tested pretty much everybody they could think of. Their report dated January 29, 2003 reads, quote, DNA testing investigation and interviews of acquaintances, family, and friends of Leslie Preer revealed no one who matched the unknown DNA patterns. To date, no viable suspect other than Carl Preer has been developed. The case remains open and pending, end quote. At this point, Detective Turner retired and Detective Drury remained as the lead investigator. It's pretty clear that by this point, many in the Jennings family were frustrated by the case's unsolved status and were turning against Carl. Leslie's brother Bill once again emailed the family an update based on a conversation he had with the state's attorney, Tom DeGonia. Leslie's sister Robin had hired a PI, and the family was seeking a second opinion on the autopsy to try to pinpoint the time of death. From Bill's email, quote, they know the death could have occurred before Carl left for work, but they cannot rule out the possibility that it occurred after he left. If they could conclude the death occurred before 7:30 a.m., they would probably file charges against Carl even with the third-party DNA unresolved. But it's not likely they could convince a jury of 12 with both time of death and the DNA issues creating reasonable doubt, end quote. I don't know what happened with this inquiry, but evidently they made no progress in solidifying the time of death at prior to 7:30 in the morning, as no charges were pursued against Carl. Lauren told the PI hired by her aunt that she still didn't believe her father killed her mother. Years passed. In January of 2010, Lauren met with Detective Drury and new to the case Detective Golian seeking an update. In this meeting, she was told for the first time the exact nature of the foreign DNA found at the scene. The family had never before been informed that the unidentified male DNA present in the house was in the form of blood found in 3 locations in the house, as well as DNA in the form of skin and blood under Leslie's nails. The DNA was all consistent and none of it was Carl's. The family was very upset upon learning that this information had been withheld from them. I think that those who suspected Carl sort of assumed or had been led to believe that the foreign DNA was just nebulous traces of some unidentified person, not that it was integrally tied to the crime scene. Now, with the news that Leslie had the male DNA under her nails, it was simply impossible that Carl was the one she had scratched. The DNA was not his. Had they known this, the family felt, it would have helped allay their suspicions about Carl's involvement. But Detective Golian told Lauren there were suspicions relating to Carl that he could not get past. The agency had apparently gotten someone to conduct some blood drying experiments and had concluded, based on those, that the dried blood at the scene was not scientifically compatible with Carl's timeline. The reality is, the investigators always had tunnel vision on Carl. So much so that at this time in 2010, even though Carl was scientifically excluded from the suspect pool, Detective Golian subpoenaed Carl's 2010 cell phone records so he could see who Carl was talking to, and he even followed him for a while. His request for a subpoena stated that Carl remained a suspect in the unsolved murder of his wife. During this surveillance, Carl did nothing incriminating, and Golian backburnered him, looking at a new suspect. Detective Golian followed up on a name Lauren had mentioned to the original investigators when she was racking her brains trying to list people who were acquainted with her mom. She told the detectives about a neighbor who gave her the creeps. In 2010, Detective Golian asked Lauren about this guy named Jim M. Lauren said this guy Jim was 15 to 20 years older than she was, but back in the 2001 timeframe, he hung out with a bunch of her friends. She met him in the late 1990s when he was a bank co-worker of her post-high school boyfriend, David Yu. She and David went to a party at Jim's, and Jim was doing drugs and partying with the 20-year-olds, even though he was in his early to mid-30s. That's always a major red flag. Leslie told Detective Golian that she and her mom ran into Jim M. on the street in Friendship Heights about 3 months before Leslie's murder. And when she introduced her mom to Jim, he said to Lauren, "Well, I see where you get your good looks from." Lauren was sketched out by this guy's off-the-charts creep factor. Further, she recalled that Jim's house was very near Leslie and Carl's, and in fact, their streets were connected by the Little Falls path where Leslie often walked Boomer. When Lauren introduced Jim to her mom on the street in Friendship Heights, Jim told Leslie that they should walk their dogs together sometime. Lauren didn't know if this ever happened, but she said her mom probably would have talked to Jim if they met up on the path and would have possibly even opened the door to him if he knocked. Then, after her mom died, she ran into Jim at Chadwick's, and he told her how sorry he was about her mom. He started crying, saying how pretty Leslie was. He told her he had run into her mom on the Little Falls path a few times. Lauren tried to change the subject and asked about Jim's wife, but he made her uncomfortable by saying his wife had left him because he was too sexually aggressive. The dude was weird. Leslie said going forward she ran into Jim quite often at bars and social events, and he always brought up her mother and asked her questions about the murder. It made her suspicious. I'm going to cut to the chase here. A lot of work was done by the Montgomery County PD investigators looking into this guy Jim. He didn't have much of a record. Eventually, Detective Golian interviewed Jim M., who was very surprised to hear that he was being looked at. He said he barely knew Leslie and Lauren. He claimed to have nothing to do with the murder, and he willingly gave the detective a DNA sample which eliminated him. The case, once again, fizzled out. This is the end of Part 1 of the Leslie Preer case. Part 2 is available right now.
AI agents are everywhere, automating tasks and making decisions at machine speed. But agents make mistakes. Just one rogue agent can do big damage before you even notice. Rubrik Agent Cloud is the only platform that helps you monitor agents, set guardrails, and rewind mistakes, so you can unleash agents, not risk. Accelerate your AI transformation at Rubrik.com. That's RUBRIK.com.